There's a lot of things we're going to have to overcome, but I do still get frustrated when people are like, that's it. We're now a fascist country. I'm done. And I'm like,
welcome to Real Talk English. Does it ever feel like democracy is on its last legs? You know, like the whole experiment is just about to collapse?
and they're calling this out and saying this is not the kind of country we want to have. So I don't think they're wrong at all. That abdication, both of responsibility and power, is really the story of this moment.
Oh, boy.
It's a really heavy question, I know. But today, we're digging into historian Heather Cox Richardson's powerful perspective, which suggests that history actually offers a surprising dose of hope. So, let's break it down.
Okay, so first, let's just set the scene. You can kind of feel it in the air, right? There's this widespread anxiety. In focus groups all across the country, voters aren't just worried, they're expressing a real, genuine fear that the American experiment is in deep trouble.
And look, this isn't just some vague worry. This quote from a voter, wow, it just shows you how intense that fear is. People are using words like fascism, and they're connecting what's happening today to some of the absolute most dangerous moments in history.
This feeling really boils down to two big ideas. First, that democracy itself feels imperiled, like it's teetering on the edge of a cliff. And second, that it got to this point because of an abdication of responsibility. This sense that leaders are failing to protect the very system they swore to uphold.
So, what do these words mean? Well, imperiled just means it's at risk of being harmed, and abdication is a failure of duty. Think of it like a captain just abandoning their ship in a storm. Getting these two concepts is really the key to unlocking the historical parallel we're about to explore.
All right, now here's where it starts to get hopeful. According to Heather Cox Richardson, this feeling of crisis, it's not new, not at all. America has been on the brink before, and history shows us there's a powerful pattern of how ordinary people fight back.
Just take the 1850s. I mean, the country was literally tearing itself apart over slavery. A law was passed allowing it to expand, and it seriously looked like democracy was finished. But what happened? This crisis sparked a movement. A brand new political party formed, Abraham Lincoln got elected, and he ultimately issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a new birth of freedom born directly out of crisis.
So what was the trigger? Well, a major factor then, and you could argue now, is when one part of the government just relinquishes its power to another. That's the thing that throws the whole system out of balance.
And to relinquish something means you voluntarily surrender it. You just give it up. Picture Congress just handing over its authority to the executive branch. It creates this huge power imbalance that puts an immense strain on the whole democratic system.
And this brings us right back to today. You know the saying, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme? Well, the recent No Kings protests can really be seen as a modern echo of those past movements, where everyday citizens just decided enough is enough and took a stand.
And just listen to the motivation behind these protests. This person explains that the military parade was ostensibly for a birthday, but the symbolism felt way more authoritarian, and that's what made them feel like they had to act.
Ostensibly is such a great word. It's for when something appears to be true on the surface, but you suspect there might be a different reality underneath. So the parade was officially for a birthday, but a lot of people saw it as a show of military force.
And this wasn't just, a few people in one city. The protests grew and grew into this massive national groundswell, a powerful wave of citizen action that just swept across the entire country.
And that is exactly what a groundswell is, a surge of public opinion that starts from the grassroots, from ordinary people, and grows into a major, major force. It perfectly captures the energy of this kind of movement.
So, what's the real impact of these movements? I mean, does getting out on the streets and chanting and holding signs, does it actually matter? Well, the evidence suggests it absolutely does.
So, how many people does it take to force a real change? You might think it's got to be millions upon millions, but the research here is, well, it's pretty shocking. It turns out nonviolent protests have never failed to bring about change after getting active participation from just 3.5% of the population. Suddenly, the impossible feels possible, doesn't it?
For a lot of the folks who participated, these protests were a huge emotional release, a national catharsis. But at the very same time, the reaction to the movement revealed a deep enmity, that raw hostility that really defines our current political divisions. So catharsis is that feeling of relief you get from finally letting out all these pent-up emotions. And enmity is that intense, active opposition.
In a moment of national tension like this, they're really two sides of the same coin.
So, all of this leads to a fundamental choice, and not just for us as citizens, but for our political leaders too. What path do you take when the whole system is under this much pressure?
The source material we're looking at highlights two really clear paths. You have some people, like Liz Cheney, who resist and are essentially defenestrated for it, and then you have others, like Lindsey Graham, who have acquiesced to the new reality. It is a stark contrast in political survival.
Okay, defenestrated is a fantastic word. It literally means to be thrown out a window, but politically, it means being suddenly and forcibly ejected from power. And to acquiesce is to give in, to accept something reluctantly, without putting up a fight.
Now, navigating these kinds of choices requires perspective, and that's exactly where the work of prolific thinkers like Heather Cox Richardson becomes so vital. They provide the historical context that fuels an informed citizenry. Someone who is prolific is just incredibly productive. They create a huge amount of work. And Richardson, with her daily newsletters and her books, is a perfect example of someone who is arming people with knowledge day in and day out.
So what have we learned here? Well, that even when democracy feels incredibly fragile, history shows it's also pretty resilient. It shows that ordinary people, through these grassroots groundswells, have an incredible amount of power, and that it only takes a small number of people, just 3.5%, to achieve profound change. In the end, it all comes down to that one choice: resistance or acquiescence.
So there you have it: imperiled, abdication, relinquishes, ostensibly, groundswell, catharsis, enmity, defenestrated, acquiesced, and prolific. 10 powerful words to help you understand this critical moment. Now that we've learned the key words and the main ideas, I really encourage you to check out the original video and further improve your listening and speaking skills. The link is right down in the description. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.